There's a math equation that quietly determines whether you retire wealthy, retire broke, or don't retire at all. It doesn't care how smart you are. It doesn't care what school you went to. It doesn't care if you got lucky in crypto or if you've never invested a single dollar in your life. It's compound interest, and most people have heard the term. But here's the problem. Hearing about it and viscerally understanding what it does to your actual life are two completely different things. So today, I'm not going to talk at you with formulas and percentages. I'm going to show you 10 versions of your life, 10 different rates of return, and I want you to feel the difference between each one, because the gap between level 1 and level 10 isn't just financial, it's the difference between a life of options and a life of obligations. Let's get into it. Before we start, here's the scenario we're working with. You're 25 years old. You invest $500 a month. That's $6,000 a year. Nothing extraordinary. A car payment, a few dinners out. You do this every single month until you're 65. 40 years. Total money you put in, $240,000. That's the input. What changes across our 10 levels is the rate of return, the interest rate your money compounds at. And what you're about to see is why that single variable rewrites your entire retirement story. Level 1, the mattress, 0% return. Level 1 is the person who doesn't trust banks, doesn't trust the market, doesn't trust anything, so they save their money in cash, under the mattress, in a safe, whatever, $500 a month for 40 years. At 65, you have exactly $240,000. That's it. That's the number. You put in $240,000 and you got back $240,000. No growth. And here's what most people miss. Because of inflation, that $240,000 at 65 buys less than $240,000 did when you were 25. You actually lost purchasing power in real terms. Level 1 is not a strategy. It's financial stagnation dressed up as safety. Level 2, the savings account, 1 to 2% return. This is most people's responsible move. Open a savings account at a big bank, earn a little interest, sleep well, knowing your money is safe. At 2%, your $240,000 investment becomes roughly $365,000 at 65. You made $125,000 on top of what you put in. That sounds decent until you realize inflation has historically averaged around 3%. You're not building wealth here, you're slowly losing it in slow motion. Level 2 is the illusion of safety. It feels smart. The math says otherwise. Level 3, the high-yield savings account or CDs, 4 to 5% return. Now we're talking. A high-yield savings account, a ladder of CDs, maybe some short-term treasuries during a good rate environment. Boring? Absolutely. But boring starts to work here. At 5%, your $240,000 becomes roughly $762,000. You tripled your money without taking on much risk. At level 3, you're finally beating inflation. You're not crushing it, but you're genuinely building something. This is where a lot of risk-averse people should live with at least some of their money, especially money they'll need in under a decade. Level 4, the conservative portfolio. 6% return, a classic 60-40 portfolio. 60% stocks, 40% bonds. This is your grandparents' financial advisor's favorite recommendation. It's been around forever, and honestly, it works. At 6% annualized return over 40 years, your $240,000 becomes $1,004,000. You just crossed $1 million. 40 years ago, you started with nothing but $500 a month, and now you have 7 figures. Level 4 is where the millionaire milestone becomes achievable for regular people with regular incomes. Level 5, the S&P 500 Index Fund, 7% real return. This is the number Warren Buffett keeps telling people to use as their benchmark. A broad index fund tracking the S&P 500 has historically returned about 10% nominally, which translates to roughly 7% after you strip out inflation. 7%. Boring, consistent, automatic. At 7%, your $240,000 becomes $1,320,000, over $1.3 million from $500 a month, with zero stock picking, zero hedge funds, zero stress. I want to be really clear here. Level 5 is where most people's financial plan should live. If you're not doing anything else, if you just throw $500 a month into a broad index fund inside a Roth IRA and forget about it, Level 5 is your destination. And for the majority of people watching this right now, level 5 is more than enough to change the trajectory of your family's financial history. Level 6, the total market portfolio, 8% return. You expand beyond the S&P 500. You add international stocks, small cap value funds, maybe real estate investment trusts. You're not picking individual stocks. You're just broadening your exposure and capturing more of the global market. At 8%, your $240,000 becomes $1,746,000. You added $426,000 just by going from 7% to 8%. 1 percentage point. That's what compounding does at scale. Small differences in rate don't create small differences in outcome. They create enormous differences in outcome. Level 7, the optimized investor, 9% return. This is the person who's done their homework. They max their 401k. They use a Roth IRA. They understand tax loss harvesting. They minimize fees. They rebalance. They don't panic sell in downturns. They don't chase meme stocks. They haven't outperformed the market through genius. They've just not destroyed their returns through bad behavior, which honestly is rarer than it sounds. At 9%, your $240,000 becomes $2,306,000, $2.3 million. We are now in life-changing generational wealth territory, not because you found some secret, because you did the basics consistently for a long time. Level 8, the active investor, 10 to 11% return. This is the person who puts in the work. They invest in individual stocks. They research businesses. Maybe they own rental properties that cash flow. Maybe they invest in small businesses alongside their market portfolio. Some of these people genuinely do better than the index. But I want to be honest with you. Most people who try this end up at level 5 or below because emotion, timing errors, and fees eat the alpha. If you do hit 10 to 11% sustained, at 10% your $240,000 becomes $3,161,000. $3,100,000. But here's the cost that doesn't show up in the spreadsheet: time, stress, and the very real risk of behavioral mistakes. Level 8 is only worth chasing if you genuinely enjoy this stuff. Otherwise, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Level 9, the business builder, 15 to 20% return. We're off the standard investment map now. Level 9 is the person who builds a business, sells it, and deploys those proceeds at unusually high rates of return, or the real estate investor who buys right, forces appreciation, and recycles equity into the next deal, or the private equity operator who understands how to compound capital through ownership, not just stock purchases. This level is accessible, but it requires a completely different set of skills and a much higher tolerance for risk and complexity. At 15%, your $240,000 becomes a staggering $18,700,000. $18 million from $500 a month. I know that number looks absurd. Run it yourself. That's what 15% compounded for 40 years does. And it's why people who build businesses and reinvest aggressively end up in a completely different economic universe than people who just save into a 401k. Level 10, the compounder, 20% plus return. Level 10 is Berkshire Hathaway in its early decades. It's the venture fund that returned 30% annually. It's the real estate empire that scaled to hundreds of units. It's Buffett before he got so big that size became his enemy. This level is not for most people. It requires extraordinary skill, extraordinary luck, or most often, both. But let's look at the math, just to understand the magnitude. At 20%, your $240,000 in contributions becomes approximately $232 million. $232 million. Same person, same $500 a month, same 40 years. The only thing that changed was the rate. That's not a financial concept. That's a philosophical statement about what time and rate of return actually mean. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Most of the content online about compound interest makes it sound easy. Just invest early and let it grow. Cool, but nobody explains that there are levels to this, and where you land on that spectrum is determined by decisions you're making right now, today. The 3 decisions that determine your level. Number 1, when you start. This is the most brutal one. Every decade you wait cuts your ending number roughly in half. If you start at 35 instead of 25, You're not 10 years behind. You're in a completely different compounding story. The math doesn't have a sympathy mode. Number 2, how much you invest. I used $500 a month as a starting point. If you can get to $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month, every dollar compounds. The amount matters as much as the rate at lower levels. Number 3, your rate of return and whether you protect it. Here's the one nobody talks about. A lot of people are at level 5 on paper, but they're actually living at level 3 because they panic sold in 2020, because they paid 1.5% in management fees, because they kept money in cash waiting for a crash. Every one of those decisions silently chips away at your effective rate. Protecting your return is as important as achieving it. You don't need to get to level 9 or level 10 to win this game. Get to level 5. Do it consistently. Start as early as possible. Protect your return from your own behavior, and let the math work for you instead of against you. The people who retire wealthy aren't mostly geniuses. They're mostly people who understood this early enough, started immediately, and didn't stop.